That concludes question period for today. The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest has a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, after the Minister of Environment answered a question from the member from Churchill, the Minister for International Trade made an inappropriate gesture, making a gun with his hand while saying boom in the direction of the member from Churchill. I'm sure every member would agree that this gesture has no place in the House of Commons, and I would like to ask the Minister to apologize.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, this member is making that up. It's completely false. I made no such gesture. I said no such word. I'm surrounded by my colleagues here. None of them saw me make a gesture or make that kind of a comment. I asked that member to apologize to me, to this side of the House.
Order. The honourable member for Burnaby New Westminster is rising on a point of order.
Speaker, I'm rising on a point of order to denounce the deplorable actions by some government members this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, you'll recall that the member for Scarborough Southwest raised a perfectly legitimate point of order on the issue of an inappropriate gesture by the Minister of Trade towards the member from Churchill earlier today. The Minister has denied the gesture, but given the screenshot and given the video that is currently circulating in the media and in social media, he may want to revise his response of earlier today. It was a highly inappropriate gesture.
Order. The honourable member for Burnaby New Westminster has the floor on a point of order, and I'm trying to listen to him. The honourable member for Burnaby New Westminster.
It was a highly inappropriate gesture, Mr. Speaker, and we believe that the Minister of International Trade owes the member from Churchill an apology.
Following the intervention by the member for Scarborough Southwest, there was an outrageous response.
Opposition lobby and attempted to get at the member for Scarborough Southwest, who was sitting in the House at the time, Mr. Speaker. Myself and the member from Sudbury had to escort him out of the House of Commons and back into the opposition lobby. I had no sooner returned to my seat when I saw the Minister of International Trade also standing in front of the member for Scarborough Southwest. He had crossed the floor, making what can only be called threatening and intimidating gestures. I also had to escort him across to the government side. It is highly inappropriate for that minister and that member of Parliament to be attempting to intimidate opposition members. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, today is International Anti-Bullying Day. This is not the first time that government members have crossed the floor inappropriately. It has to stop. There is no excuse for this behaviour, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to read into the record your statement on decorum in the House that you made on Wednesday, December 12, 2012. You said at that time, "My task as Speaker is to ensure that the intensity of feeling expressed around some issues is contained within the bounds of civility without infringing on the freedom of speech that members enjoy. The Chair tries to ensure that our rules are adhered to in a way that encourages mutual respect." Mr. Speaker, I want to say to you today, you must ensure that civility. So we ask you, how will you ensure that civility, and what will you do to stop incidences of this sort from occurring in the House of Commons again? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to respond. Earlier this afternoon, it was alleged that I made a gesture in this House that was akin to pointing a gun. In fact, the footage shows very clearly what I did was point to the end of this House You will notice, Mr. Speaker, there was no cocking motion. There was no trigger motion. In fact, anyone who knows me knows that when I point at people, when I point at objects, that is how I point. If anyone actually took offense to how I pointed to the end of the House, obviously I would apologize for that. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I would also want to address the issue of my conversing with my colleague across the way. As you may recall, I waited until things had settled down in this House. Obviously, I wanted to clarify for him what the intent of the motion was, and I also expressed my desire that he express an apology, having suggested that I would make a motion that would be akin to pointing a pistol at someone. Mr. Speaker, that's never been how I've conducted myself in this House. I believe Mr. Speaker, I believe that we in this House should be conducting ourselves with the highest level of decorum. We should be setting an example for others across the country because they view these proceedings on television. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, that on the rare occasions where I have uttered a word or a phrase that was deemed to be unparliamentary, I've always stood up to accept that and to apologize. Today is a different matter. The gesture I made was a pointing gesture, one that I often use. It was obviously misconstrued by the opposition. Obviously, I'm going to use great care to make sure I don't use that motion in the future because of the possibility it will be misinterpreted. At the time, I want to assure you, Mr. Speaker, there was no intention at all, at any time during the proceedings this afternoon, for me to suggest that I was aiming a pistol or a gun at anyone else in this House. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, you'll have an opportunity to view the video of this particular incident. And I believe you will find that it is also an innocent gesture, and I believe I've clarified that here in this House. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to also clarify for the record, I did go and speak to the NDP House Leader, the member from Burnaby New Westminster, who was a fellow British Columbia Member of Parliament, who I know. I told him that the Member of Parliament from Scarborough Southwest should apologize to the honourable member, or to be prepared to make the allegation outside. Members of Parliament, as you know, as the Member of Parliament Harris knows, are protected by parliamentary privilege inside the House of Commons, meaning they have parliamentary immunity. If anything else is being inferred, it's completely incorrect, and I apologize if there is any other inferences from that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I will endeavour to examine the footage cited by the Opposition House Leader and the Minister of Trade and come back to the House in due course. It being 6:54, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order.
The honourable member for Churchill.
Too many Conservative ministers have a casual relationship with the truth on Bill C-23. The Environment Minister is claiming she was in provincial cabinet in 2001 and helped solve a crisis with identification following the September 11th attacks. And yet she wasn't even elected until 2004. The minister claims every hamlet has photo ID. The MLA for South Baffin said his constituents have to fly to Iqaluit. Will the Environment Minister come clean on voter ID cards for Northerners and agree to stop reinventing history?
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the comments yesterday, after 9/11 in Nunavut, we required identifications for our citizens in order to access aircrafts, to get on aircrafts for medical purposes. I was in Cabinet in 2004 when we purchased the cameras for the municipalities in Nunavut so that Nunavut can access identification cards to board the aircrafts after 9/11 incidents. As you all know, the laws were changed that required identification. And yes, in fact, I was in Cabinet when we purchased those cameras.
I understand the honourable member from Malpeque has a point of order.
Yes,
Order. Order. The honourable member Malpeque has a point of order.
Point of order is a fairly lengthy point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising on a point of...
I've given the floor to the honourable member from Malpeque. I'll hear his point of order. I'll ask other members to come to order.